Hey guys, this is Dan Seifert from mobileburn.com, and this here is the AT&T version of the Samsung Galaxy S2. Now we've already taken a look at the Galaxy S2 a couple times now. We took a look at the global version a couple months ago, and then most recently we took a look at the Samsung Galaxy S2 Epic 4G Touch for Sprint. So be sure to check out our reviews on those. Now this one is very similar to the global version, much more so than the Epic 4G Touch was, but there are some slight differences. Just as a quick recap of the hardware here, you're looking at a 4.3-inch WVGA screen, so it's a little bit smaller than the 4.5-inch or 4.52-inch screen on the Epic 4G Touch. It's WVGA like I mentioned, so it's 480 by 800 pixels of resolution. It's a Super AMOLED Plus, so it is the same bright, colorful, punchy, great-looking screen that we've seen before. And as you can see, you've got some really good viewing angles as well, so you can see the image no matter what angle I put it at. Now below the screen you've got 4 capacitive buttons as opposed to the standard or as opposed to the layout on the European model that had a hard physical home button. So you've got menu, home, back, and search there. And up above you've got a 2 megapixel front facing camera, a light sensor, and your earpiece. Now the AT&T model does not feature a notification light that we did see on the Epic 4G Touch, but it is lacking on the AT&T model, much like the European version. And if you notice here, the body itself is a bit more squared off, much like the European version was, unlike the rounded corners that we had on the Epic 4G Touch. Now if we take a look at the side profile of it, you can see it preserves the thinness that we saw on the original model for the global or European markets. Clocks in at just under 9 millimeters thick at its thinnest point, so it is very thin and svelte there, so it's a bit thinner than the Sprint version. On this side you've only got a volume rocker, nothing else there. Taking a look at the bottom, you've got a micro USB port and a microphone there. This micro USB port does support MHL, so you can plug in an adapter to plug a HDMI cable into a TV, but that adapter is not included with the purchase, so you got to supply your own. Now if we turn the Galaxy S2 on its other side, you can see there isn't much here except for the power sleep unlock key, a little bit further down from the top than we saw on the Sprint model, so it's a little bit easier to reach with your thumb there. There's no physical camera key on this particular version. And then at the top we've got a 3.5mm headphone jack, and a microphone port there as well. Now if we take a look at the back of the device, you can see we've got our 8 megapixel autofocus camera with a flash, which is the same as the other 2 models that we saw earlier. Nice textured back cover here, so it helps aid in grip. Got a Galaxy S2 logo, not much else except for you got a speaker down at the bottom under this ridge here. Popping open the back cover, you've got the same 1650 milliamp hour battery that we saw on the European model, so it does not have the larger battery as the Epic 4G Touch, for Sprint, that had an 1800 milliamp hour battery. And then right there you can see is a slot where you can put in a micro SD card. It does not come with a micro SD card out of the box. There is 16 gigabytes of internal storage, but if you want to expand that, you can. Now we happen to have here the Sprint Samsung Galaxy S2 Epic 4G Touch for some side-by-side comparisons with the AT&T model here. And as you can see, like I mentioned earlier, the squared off corners of the AT&T model are a bit different than the rounded ones featured on the Sprint version. And obviously the Sprint version is much bigger as it has the 4.52-inch screen versus the 4.3-inch screen found on the AT&T model. Now if we put them up side by side or face to face, you can see the Sprint version is a bit bigger. If we do a little side-by-side comparison here, you can also see the Sprint version is thicker. And the rounded corners on the Sprint version kind of continue along the side here, while the AT&T model is a bit sharper edged there. On the back of the phone, you can see the couple other differences. You've got the flash below the lens of the camera here, whereas on the AT&T model it is to the right of it. And down at the bottom, the speaker grill has moved from the left side of the phone over to the right-hand side. And since it's thicker, or since it's thinner than the Sprint version, you can see you've got more pronounced ridge here on the little bump at the bottom. And if we look at one other thing here, the placement of the power sleep unlock key is much lower on the AT&T model than it is on the Sprint version. So I find it's much easier to reach the AT&T version with my thumb when the phone is in your hand. And it's a bit easier to handle as well since it is smaller. It's also a bit lighter. This is about 129 grams for the Sprint version. We're looking at 122 grams for the AT&T model, so smaller size, a little bit lighter. But those are the main differences. Inside, you're looking at pretty much the same processor, same RAM, same version of Android, and of course TouchWiz on top of that as well. There are a couple of differences with AT&T's version of TouchWiz. You can see here the messaging icon is a little bit different. It is a little stylized a little differently, and the threaded theming there is a little bit different as well. It actually looks even more like the iPhone in the AT&T model than it does on other versions. You can see there a little bit different between the Sprint and the AT&T models. And I'm going to do one other hardware comparison for you here. This is the AT&T Samsung Infuse 4G that came out earlier this year. So this is a very similar styled phone to the Galaxy S models, even though it's technically not a Galaxy model. But this one has that 4.5-inch screen versus the Galaxy S2's 4.3, and you can see the size difference here. But if you look at the other features, the styling is very, very similar. You've got your camera in the same spot, same kind of squared off corners, squared off edges along the side. The two phones are very similar as far as thickness goes. Other than the larger real estate on the Infuse, which you can kind of see there. The back of the phones are very similar. You've got a similar pattern on the textured battery cover, but like we saw with the Sprint version, the flash is on the bottom of the camera as opposed to next to it. Now, what's kind of interesting is, and this is the same goes for the Sprint Epic 4G Touch, is the battery is not transferable between the phones. So the battery in the AT&T model of the Galaxy S2 does not work in the Sprint version, and if you happen to be an Infuse 4G owner, your battery will not fit in the Galaxy S2 either. So, going to have to buy separate batteries if you happen to own both phones. Now that we've got our hardware comparisons out of the way, we can take a look at the interface here that we have on the AT&T Galaxy S2. Now, as you can see, it's very fast and smooth, as we expected from the other Galaxy S models. This is powered by the same 1.2 GHz Samsung Exynos processor. It also has 1 GB of RAM as well, so everything is very smooth and effortless, as we've seen with the other models. And as you can see here, it's also featuring Samsung's TouchWiz 4.0 interface, and you've got 7 home screens that you can choose or fill with widgets and shortcuts and such. You can scroll through them with this little bar here quickly and easily. Up top, you've got a notification bar that has shortcuts for various settings. Now, this is not considered a 4G model by AT&T, but it does support its HSPA Plus network. It does not have support for its LTE network, though, so you do not see an LTE toggle like we saw with the Sprint phone had a WiMAX toggle up top. Looking at the application tray, you've got the same side-scrolling application tray that can circle right back around, and you can choose to organize it by a couple of different ways. You can do it alphabetically, an alphabetical list, or you can customize the grid itself. If we look at some the preloaded applications here, you've got some ones from AT&T. You've got the AT&T Code Scanner, Family Map, AT&T Navigator. You've got a featured apps application there. Facebook is pre-installed. Let's get out of there. There we go. You've got Live TV from AT&T, Media Hub, which is actually a Samsung application. That allows you to download TV shows and movies if you'd like. My AT&T is a account management application there. Quick Light is pre-installed. You got Samsung's Task Manager here, which we saw on the other models. Yellow Pages application and Words with Friends free version is pre-installed there. And thankfully, they've also included the Samsung Keys Air application, which was very cool to use to transfer images and media and stuff like that, and songs, and access your messages and such from a computer wirelessly over the same wireless network, which is very cool.